otherwise, first topic is on product, what do we call it? Yeah, product market fit. Dave Thomas and Lesley are our speakers. So Lesley has been in the competition as a company, and she's also been a speaker. Have you been a volunteer yet, besides speaking, Judge?
No.
Okay, we can change that.
I feel like Floyd will get on.
Yes. And Dave Thomas is here from Rocket Builders and SFU Venture Labs, one of our accelerator partners, and I think has been giving this talk for
17 years.
17 years. So this is information that has aged very well. That said, we have updated it over the last 17 years, but it's also very essential. So we always like to start with this topic. So I'm going to give Dave and Lesley the chance to introduce themselves while I switch over the PowerPoint slides. So over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Angie. So as I said, I'm Dave Thomas. I'm part of Venture Labs and also Rocket Builders, and really have spent better part of 20 years specializing in, we call it go-to-market. In other words, what are all the different things that you need to do in order to understand the market and actually go and succeed in the marketplace. And we'll get into some of the details. A lot of the presentation that we have today is going to talk about a lot of the different steps that you need to make. And I think that's enough about me, and I'll ask Lesley to introduce herself.
I'm Lesley Duncan. As Angie said, I had a startup. I was in the competition. I worked at Venture Labs as well, helping companies, and am now working in a quantum computing startup. So just trying to do entrepreneurship everywhere. Yep. And yeah, so the relevant part here is that I also worked at a market research company and did graduate work in research. So I know how to ask people questions, and I'm going to help you guys do that as well.
Okay. So we're back to the home screen. Just give us a second here. We're not the IT department.
Okay.
Alrighty. So what we're going to do today is really talk about product market fit, and to a certain extent, something that doesn't happen a lot in very early stage companies is we're talking about how do I manage my product. And when I say manage my product, it isn't the scientific part of how do I build it, what does it do, all the different things, but it's more about how do I manage what the market thinks of it. So how many of you have an iPhone? Okay, how many of you are Android fans? Okay. How many of you like to switch back and forth all the time? Only a couple people. So why are there Apple people and why are there Android people? It's an incredibly complex mixture of things, other than maybe your employer gave you one. So we're going to try to get into some of the factors behind your ability to predict how this is going to happen in the future. So as we said before, this is myself and Lesley. This is how you can reach us. Welcome to reach out after the event and after the different things to talk about stuff in detail. That's one of the things we like to do. Lesley kind of undersold herself. These are the things that she's done, quite impressive. Been part of a number of different companies and is also very knowledgeable really in how do you do market research. Myself, mentor in residence for a number of years. The items at the bottom, the 4 + 1 + 1, I've been in 6 startups. So 4 failures, 1 that's still meandering along, and 1 success. So your standard sort of statistics for success in startups. And something that's very interesting to do. And something that, even if you raise money or don't raise money, you learn a lot in every single one of them. So I'll be truthful and say, I know how to make a mess out of stuff. Okay, pretty good at making all the mistakes that are possible and everything else. I also have a hobby business. So I run the sailing school at Jericho, at the Jericho Sailing Center down in the Spanish Banks area. How many of you know how to sail? All right, the rest of you are missing out. Okay, there's some shameless self-promotion, but it's a very interesting environment in Vancouver. There's a lot of things that are going on, and more than anything, what's interesting for me is that we run a sailing school, which is kids summer camps, adult lessons, and 99.9% of our marketing is online. And I do one manual registration every year for this very nice great-grandmother who comes down to put her great-grandchildren in the sailing school. Everybody else fulfills via our website. So we're an analog business that is totally dependent on digital. And that's, you know, if you're in the clean tech space or anything like that, it's a very important thing to remember. So just gonna make a comment about round 2. How many of you entered the competition before? Okay, there's a couple that have entered in the past. So when you get into round 2, it's really a business model canvas, short video. Remember that there are certain questions you have to answer. There's 4 topics, only one of them is about your product. I often review some of them or read some of them, and you're supposed to do it in 5 pages. There's 3.5 pages about my product. And then, oh, by the way, the market is, and then there's this little vague statement. Okay, so the answer here is that there are 4 questions. 3 are about the market. How does the market work? Where are you gonna fit? If it's part of the value chain or if it's something different, what's gonna happen? And there's one about revenue and money. In other words, what's your simple business model? It doesn't have to be super detailed, but I believe it's really important for you to go through and understand and actually read the questions in advance and spend more time trying to answer the questions you're not familiar with than the ones which are really easy. Like, my product is great, that's cool, we all accept that, but also explain to me why people are gonna acquire it and why they're gonna pay you money for it. And the jury is hoping for concise, consistent answers. So if you make one claim on page 1 and a totally different claim on page 5, they might pick that up. Okay. So we talk a little bit about the business model canvas. How many people are familiar with this? How many people have, yeah. So I think many of you have used it. It's a really simple tool, but it's also one where you can fill in it. It looks like it's got 9 different sort of quadrants in it. Usually you start top right and work your way around. Like, it's hard to go and start with the money and then say, what's my product last? So what I would suggest you do is fill this out, and it's really easy to update. And each one of these squares could have all sorts of material on another page or another area which is back up to it, but it gives you an idea more than anything of what you don't know right now. It tells you what are the things that are important, what are the things that are missing, and stuff like that. So in my place, for me, my opinion, the most important question you have to answer is, how am I going to win in the marketplace? What am I going to do to succeed? I mean, if you go and say, I'm another one of like something else, but it's, you know, how am I going to succeed? What am I going to do, not just 5 years from now, but what am I going to do in the next 6, 12, and 18 months? A lot of the time I can tell you what things are going to be like 5 years from now in a successful company, or 15 years from now, but the hard part is, what do I do right away? Because if you don't get that right, you may not get the opportunity to do 5 years. So it's more than just the product and how you move in the market. And when you're showing numbers, these nice revenue graphs that go top right, and you know, they sort of start bottom left in a graph and go all the way up. Show the unit economics and let people understand, are you going to sell, you know, 10 people a product for $1 million each, or are you going to sell 1 million customers a product that costs $10? How do you get that number? Oops, wrong way. If you're not sure how to answer a question, it's very easy to say, this is still a work in progress. Say, this is what I have right now, but I'm still working on it, and I will, hopefully by the end of the competition, have a much clearer answer. It's a sophisticated audience. Don't explain really simple things. So if you're going to invent a new photocopier, don't tell them the history of Xerox. All right? So make it easy for them to understand. Tables and point form are very acceptable. And remember the thing that it's about your company and how you'll succeed, rather than the fact that there's a massive market. How many of you are going into financial services? Anybody got a financial services product? There's a couple. Financial services has 19 subsectors. So I would suggest you decide, I'm going to pick a couple, and I'm going to decide what to do, because it makes it a lot easier for somebody to say, they're going to do this right now, and that's what's going to make things work. All right, here's my question for the day. How many of you used AI? How many of you have an AI company? Okay? How many of you, AI is part of your product? All right? How many of you used AI to draft your submission to New Ventures BC? Okay. Remember, as long as you edit it and you can back up what it says, that's absolutely fine. Okay? So it's interesting. When I look at the hands that are up in the room, the people in the back can say that over half of the companies that are here today have AI either in their product or are a horizontal AI company, which is an interesting way of looking at the market. 5 years ago, nobody would have known what AI was, okay? Or if they knew what it was, but it wasn't part of their setup at all. Okay, let's get into the real material. So we're gonna go through 5 different topics: market research and segmentation, and I'm gonna say a few things at the beginning, and then Lesley's gonna take over. Then we'll talk about understanding the consumer, or understanding who you really sell to. What's a whole solution or a whole product? What's required for it to be there? Positioning, and finally a little bit about metrics. And down on the bottom, if you look at the questions that are part of your round 2 submission, we're really talking to questions 1, 2, and 3 as we go through these different sectors, the different pieces. So a couple of things. Successful growth companies will have what's called a minimum viable product. And so everybody goes, oh, I want to get to MVT. So in reality, there's about 4 different versions of that. It's a minimum demonstrable product. I can show it to somebody. There's a minimum viable product. There's a minimum sellable product. And then there's a minimum product for replicable sales. In other words, what everybody wants. How many of you bought an iPhone 1? Okay, I see a couple of the senior citizens in the back have had one. But it's interesting, you know, how many of you still have your iPhone 1? Nobody. Well, you do, but you don't use it every day. All right, so the real answer is things get better all the time. So with the thing that's really interesting about iPhone, it was only the iPhone 2 that actually streamed video. So there's super significant functionality improves all the time. So one thing that's important for you is to understand what your product roadmap is as you roll out and how the market is going to want it. So if you look at this little diagram, it's what's my product, how does it fit the market, how do I obtain revenue? You have to have a viable revenue model, and then quite often you need an addressable market with an engine of growth, all right? So how many of you have heard of Hootsuite? There should be pretty much everybody in the city of Vancouver. So when Hootsuite started, they were able to function and work really well with Twitter. And at that time, Twitter had 5 million subscribers. So the real answer is their timing was impeccable, because the growth of social media, I mean, not just Twitter, but every other form of social media grew exponentially. And it meant that the service that they provided, which latched on to the social media sort of market, had phenomenal growth. So in this case, it was an engine of growth, and it really served Hootsuite extremely well. So let's get into market research, and we'll get into some of the fundamentals. And Lesley, you come up whenever you're ready to go. So one of the things we want to do is, why do I segment? Because I hear a lot of people say, I'm going to build a new car, and then I'm going to sell it to everybody all over the world. The answer is that doesn't work. Okay, so we segment mostly because everybody theoretically might be able to buy your product, but who's most likely to buy it? In other words, I want to know, I have very little marketing and development resources, not just money, but people's time. Where do I focus it? It will narrow your whole product definition. What am I trying to build? And quite often it limits competition because I go where others are not. And also, if you have been successful in the past, it can help you out.
Hey, Dave, there's a question from online. Do you want to take them later?
Yeah, no, let's take it right now.
Okay. From Anonymous. You could sign them if you want. There's a revenue model, and there's revenue and revenue potential. However, in evaluating an early stage startup, how important is growth potential?
I think one of the statements you get quite often, we'll talk a bit about it later, but you'll get this massive total addressable market. And everybody goes, oh, look at this, it's a fantastic market. I mentioned that in financial services before, but there could be a sub-market that has what's called the CAGR, compound annual growth. So that actually is a very attractive number, so a growing market. How many of you would like to be going into the newspaper business right now? Nobody, okay? So that's got negative growth. It isn't working. If you're going into some forms of digital media, there can be growth in certain segments. Streaming, for example, is really good. So yes, the answer to the question is growth is really important, or growth and lack of competition is another really neat combination, and that's one of the ways of looking at it. So I think one last slide from me. This is from Sam Walton, one of the famous retailers in the world. It says, whenever you get confused, go to the store. The customer has the answers and all the money. So customers or consumers, whether it's a business, whatever else, often vote with their wallet. They tell you what they're interested in based on not what they tell you, oh, your product's fantastic, but do they actually buy? Okay, so something that's an important thing that's there. And Lesley, I think you're up.
All right, so really early stage, what you're looking at is you're testing your value proposition. You don't have your full product, you probably aren't in market yet, or if you are, you probably don't have the full version of it. And so what I'm going to focus on is really helping you at the early stage, or if you're bringing out a new product, to figure out what you need to know and when you need to know it. So really what you're trying to do is test your value proposition, right? So this is, who's your customer? This market segmentation. What is their problem? The key focus you want to have here is what is their problem, not what is your solution, but what is their problem. You also want to know what they think they need to solve it. Not what you think, but what they think. Then you get into, can your product potentially offer that solution? If so, would they prefer your solution over somebody else's solution? I can buy an iPhone or I can buy an Android. They both solve my problem, so what do I want? Can they pay enough for it? So is it within their means and within their budget? And if they do buy it, can they actually use it? So does it fit into a system they have, especially if you're an enterprise thing? Does this meet their security requirements? So that's what you're trying to figure out. Most of customer discovery research is that. You're testing your value proposition and parts of it. And my overarching advice to you on this is to be very, very humble in your research. What you're trying to do here is find the holes. You're trying to find the gaps. You're trying to find the answers to the things that you don't know. And so really what you want to do is rigorously test everything that is an I think. All right, so any hypothesis you have about what your solution is, what your value is, you're going to go and you want to test this like you're wrong, right? So the whole idea is you're super excited about your product. You're building it like it's right. When you're going to go talk to people, you want to find out how you're wrong. And if this is the approach that you take overarchingly, you're going to have a whole lot more success. So a way to think about this is we're crash testing, right? So automotive, they have to design things for safety. There's requirements. And really what they're doing is putting this crash test dummy into a car and running it into a wall as fast as they can to try and create as much damage as they can to understand, in a worst case scenario, what happens to the passenger. We're doing this with your value proposition. Any of your customer discovery work is putting your value proposition, here's what I think about my product and how the market wants it, and you're going to run that as fast as you can into as many walls as you can. You're going to talk to as many different people. You're going to ask as many different customer segments. And if your crash test dummy survives, you got the potential that you have a product that is solving a problem that actually exists for people in market. So somebody or some segment will actually want to buy your product. If you're doing this really weakly, or you're doing it really well and your crash test dummy doesn't survive, that's great, because before you put a bunch of money into it and a bunch of time and a bunch of resources, you've learned that there's something wrong with the assumptions you have. So you can go back, pivot, change, and go and put another dummy in the car and try and run that one into as many walls as you can. So what I'm going to do now is sort of walk you through the fact that there's a bunch of different things that you're testing at different times, depending on the maturity of your product or your business. So if you are still at a concept stage, if you're early on, and you haven't produced anything, and really what you're doing is testing the idea. So what you're putting in that car in the driver's seat is this thing, does this problem exist? Not your solution, not anything else, but is there actually a problem? And so tile is the example I'll use going through this. Does everyone know what tile is? Hands up if you do. So this is basically like the early AirTag, right? You attach it to something and it will beep and help you find it if you've lost it. And so really what tile went and tried to do was first off figure out, do people lose things that are high value enough and small enough that they would like to be able to find them at some point later on from a distance. And so their hypothesis was, yes, people have this problem, and that it could be solved if we had this little electronic device that would be trackable. And that, are there enough people that have this problem? If I only can sell this to 5 people, that's not really a viable business model. And so they went and did customer discovery interviews. So they went and talked to people and said, hey, do you lose your keys a lot? Do you lose your wallet? Is there, would you like to know where your laptop is? And they came back and found out that, yes, this is a problem for people, and no, they didn't have a good solution for it other than running around their house for 20 minutes pulling apart their couch. So that got them, so they went and did this, and they asked what the problem was. Do you frequently lose things that you would like to find that are high value? Not do you want a solution, but do you have the problem? So next stage, they had enough support for this. Then they said, okay, well, we had this idea for this tile, this little thing that it will be Bluetooth connected, it will, like your phone will tell you where this is. So would this solve the problem, right? So now we're introducing a product. And what they had to figure out at this point was, could people implement this product, right? So one thing was it required Bluetooth, and not all smartphones at the time had Bluetooth. So they had to figure out if their customer segment, the people who had the money to buy little electronic things to attach to their phone, would they be likely to have the version of the phone that could actually implement it, right? And does it work? So if we give you a tile to test and you put it on your keys and we give you your phone, can you figure out how to use this, right? Is this something that requires a 3-week seminar? That's not going to work really well as a consumer product. So they went out to the market and said, okay, well, let's do some user testing. If we have this and we give it to you, can you figure out how to use it, and does it work? Is it loud enough? Is it helpful? And so they had some ideas on, what would be the threshold that we'd need to go forward with this. And so they, said if 80% of the people or 85% of the people can figure out how to use this with, written instructions, we should be okay. And they did. And then they also figured out what worked well, what didn't. No red flags at that point, so they kept going. Will people buy it? Right, so now we have a problem, people lose things, a potential solution. If I attach this to my phone, I can find it. Will people buy it? And this is a tricky one because you can't just ask people if they will buy things. People are notoriously bad at predicting their future behavior. They want to, if they know you, they probably want to tell you that you're doing a great thing and this is really cool. If they don't know you, there's still sort of a bias to just be nice to people and not cause conflict. So most people won't say, it's actually kind of expensive, or I don't think I'd pay for it, or it's not a big enough problem that I would use it. So you have to ask people, but you also have to take their responses with a bit of a grain of salt. And so what Tile did, which was really, I think, fantastic and a really rigorous test, is they went and tried to sell it. And so instead of using a Kickstarter, right, so they sort of said, well, let's see if we sell a beta version of this, will people buy it? But Kickstarter is full of a segment of people who are interested in buying the new thing. They're early adopters, and they want to buy cool tech things. And these are people who are kind of asking to have cool things sold to them. They went and they started a marketing campaign, pretty low, drove people to their own website to say, if we're actually in market trying to sell this, will we be able to identify our customers, potential customers, drive them to us, and get them to give us money, right? These were the key things. And they did. I think they raised $2.7 million in working capital with their launch of beta test, try this thing. That then got them to manufacturing. So they were actually really effectively testing the question of, will people buy this? The next question that they had was, will this scale, right? Is this a one-off campaign and all the people who were going to buy it now have bought it, and now we won't be able to sell it to anybody else? So is this actually now a viable business? And so this is where they got into really the cost modeling of, if we're doing this at scale, what does it cost? What does our manufacturing look like? How do we supply? Now we're trying to get on the shelves at Best Buy and at Walmart. How do we do this? And so that's where they looked into sort of more of the market analysis side of things. So at every stage of a business, at every stage of a product, there is an opportunity, and I would encourage you to look for the things that you don't know and really go to the market to find the answers. So this is the whole Steve Blank, get outside the building. Talk to people, create the opportunity for people to provide the action that you're actually looking for beyond talking to them, but go to the customer. That they are the market, they are the ones who will be ultimately giving you revenue. That's who you need to find out. answers from. So next question is, this is great, you all believe me and you all think that customer discovery is what you should be doing. How do you do it? How do you do effective research for your company depending on whatever size you might be? I'm going to say go back to the business model canvas. It's the overarching theory of your business. You will have information in each of these blocks to clearly lay out what you're doing, how you think this all goes together. There's going to be parts that you're kind of less sure about and you're not quite certain on. That's probably where you want to start looking, right? These are the assumptions that you're making. These are things you don't have evidence for. And then realize that all of those are connected. So if you're making an assumption on, who your customer segment is, that might impact your product. If you're making assumptions on who your key partners need to be, that might have impacts later on or earlier on. So think about how they all relate to each other. And use this to start with your scope of work. And what you'll do then is say, okay, well, it turns out I'm not really sure, if this one particular segment has this problem. I think they do, but I'm not sure. So that's the assumption you're making, and that's the one you need to test. So come up with a list of those. And then with those, look at what has the biggest priority, right? What has the most hinging on it? Or what's going to be the most expensive to test? And start there. And you're going to go with what's the best information you have available as a starting point, because you have to, but that's where you want to focus your attention. And also when you're looking at this, I'm going to highlight that it's really important to figure out and pay attention to who you're talking to and who you're asking for opinions from, right? These should be people who are representative of your actual market segment. Or if you don't have a product that's sort of developed enough, people who know your market, who know that industry. You shouldn't be talking to just your friends. There was somebody that I was talking to and they're saying, oh, well, I have this thing and I've done some discovery work. Who have you talked to? Well, I talked to about 8 people who are all graduate students in biochemistry. I'm like, well, what's your product? Oh, it's a skincare product. Okay, did you talk to anybody outside of your friend group? No, but they all think that it'll work. If I'm trying to market a skincare product, I don't think my market niche is graduate students in biochemistry. It's probably a much broader group than that of people who are going to stores, people who are maybe concerned about their skin, people who have super dry skin. There are better characteristics to look at. And so what I'm really going to encourage you to do is say, who is my product market and are the people that I'm talking to representing that? And is it a broad representation? And really prioritize de-risking. So whether that is, depending on what stage you're at, is it, I need to really test, is the problem a problem? Do I really need to test that my solution is a possible solution? Do I need to test that there are implementation issues in people actually buying it? Whatever that is, test that early and test that often. And really what you want to be doing is looking for information that will help you change and help you make decisions for what should you do next. So rather than just saying yes, no, you want to know why, which is this one. So if somebody says, well, I don't have that problem, or I don't think this solution would be a fit, ask them why. It can help you to change your product and see, oh, well, maybe I'm actually just slightly off and I could be that solution, or I could modify what I'm doing. And you don't want to modify just for just one person, but if a bunch of people say, yes, I need something that's waterproof, and yours isn't waterproof, but it could be waterproof, right? Those are the things that it's not a no, it's a no in its current incarnation. And it also can then help you with marketing later on. If you know why somebody wants something, you can then in your marketing say, hey, are you looking for this? I have it. But if you haven't asked them what they're looking for, you can't do that. So there's sort of a way to reuse the information that you're getting. You're using it initially to determine, is this the right path? What do I need to change? What's happening? That can then come back and say, okay, but here's what my competitors are doing. Here's why they like my competitors and not me. How do I fit in there? So I would really encourage you to look at that in terms of when you're doing this research. Take the opportunity. It's invaluable, especially at an early stage, to go and talk to who your customers are, who your customers potentially will be, and get them to tell you what it is that they need that you can give them. And I will turn it back over to Dave.
Okay. Great, thank you very much.
Oh, hey, I have a few questions for you, Lesley.
Okay.
Okay, so if we have the time. Would it make sense to partner with a company in your target market, let them use it for free, collect data, test hypotheses, and refine the MVP based on that?
It can, depending on how you're working with them and what the IP is as well. So if it's somebody who really you plan to work together or you could complement each other, then yes. But if it's just that any feedback you can get is great, but just make sure that it works with what you're hoping to do with your company and how you want to align with them going forward.
Okay, another one. So you're talking to businesses in your target segments. They like your concept and your hypothesis. How would you estimate what they would actually buy?
One thing to do is to ask them what they're currently buying of other things. So they won't be able to say, oh, I would spend this much on your product or I would do this. But if you can say, here's the problem that we're solving, what are you currently spending in this space? If they're willing to tell you, look at what their current behavior is and extrapolate from there.
Okay, last one from here. Is there such thing as defining a market segment too narrowly?
Yes, potentially. So if I'm only saying that I'm going to look at people who are aged 24 to 27, who have a certain income, who live in a certain area, who do this, is that too narrow and is it useful? So I would really say what's your target area and look to the sides of that. But yeah, it will depend on the product. It will depend on how you're looking at your segmentation, which Dave is going to talk about. So the answer might come out of Dave's next section.
All right, thank you very much, Lesley. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between a revolutionary product and an evolutionary product. This is also sometimes called blue ocean, red ocean. So a revolutionary product is something different. So what are a couple of revolutionary products that we've seen in the last 30 years or so?
iPods.
Sorry, what?
iPods.
The iPod, which then the iPad and the iPhone. What else? I think the electrification of stuff. And, yeah? The fax machine, right? Because it was the beginning of sending data. And then email came after the fax machine, stuff like that. Yeah?
The internet.
The internet for sure. And what's interesting is we're still getting the value of the internet because it's all about small sensors. It's all about connected devices. So getting the internet by itself and then getting the value can take a lot longer too. Yeah? The what? The BlackBerry, so the smartphone. Again, something which is there. So there's a whole thing. And you can go back historically, things like artificial light, pretty good stuff, right? You know, we depend on that a lot. And then a whole series of things happen. So a revolutionary product is something absolutely new. So a whole bunch of you have AI companies. How many of you think your product's going to be absolutely revolutionary? Okay, a couple. That's okay. We'll find out in a year. How's that sound? Okay. It's interesting to see whether it is one of many or totally unique, or if it does something which is truly different, things like that. An evolutionary product, I'm in the sailing school business. Sailing's been around a long time. That's how people came to North America 500 years ago, that sort of stuff. So anything I do is totally evolutionary, all right? So it's like that. If you are going into a market where there's a lot of competition and you have a couple of different features, you're going into what's called a red ocean where there's a lot of competition, and it can be great, but it can also be relatively difficult. So restaurant industry, food delivery, stuff like that, others have been there before, so you have to be careful with how you're going to approach all that stuff. So one of the things, there's a gentleman called Steve Blank, who's very well known for a number of different companies. He also teaches at Stanford. And one of the things that he says you're trying to figure out is how do I take my hypothesis, my assumptions, turn them into reality with proof? What are the things that I want to do? And underneath the next block there is Steve Jobs explaining why Next Computing was going to succeed. And he goes through all of the steps that you would do through to figure out market, penetration, what's product market fit and all the other stuff. It's about 20 minutes long, so we won't watch it today. But if you take the deck when you get it and click on that, you can watch him doing all the homework. So Apple these days says, no, we just make products, revolutionary products. In the olden days, they had to do the same thing that everybody else had to do. Once you're a market leader, the rules change a bit and they're really stacked in your favor. So what you're really trying to do is make a prediction, ship the product, measure the results, repeat and see what happens again. And that's a direct quote from one of the foremost angel investors in British Columbia. And he always divided companies he talked to into guys who said, well, I'm just going to throw it out there and see what sticks on the wall, versus somebody who said, well, I think this is going to happen and I'm going to go test it. And he always preferred the people who had a hypothesis that they were going to test when it came through. And what you're trying to get to is the reality. People are happy to buy my product because of the value it provides. So this is not to say that top-down is not valuable. So the idea of a large market, and there's another link in the top-down part, and it's Ali G explaining why you should buy the ice cream glove. So again, you can watch this on your own time. It's typical Ali G stuff. But the big thing here is revenue is not a function of market size. So if you go, I think I can get 2% of the AR market in North America, everybody, that's actually a statement which is code for many investors that they don't know what they're going to do next. So, okay, you have to be careful and say, if I can get 10% of this market or 1% of this market, it really is also sometimes a statement that says, I don't know where my customers are really going to come from. And most, whether it's investors or you, it's your company. I think you and your coworkers should prefer to know, I think this is where the customers are going to come from, because it means the effort you're putting in is worth it. So if you do a top-down model, 2% penetration, $1 billion market is $20 million. That's all right. But there's also an equation. It's the leads. What percentage convert times my price equals my revenue. And that's a way of looking at a bottom-up model and something that is good. So again, we could say, what's my total addressable market? And it'll cascade down through a whole series of different steps. Something you see here on the right-hand side of the slide is a bowling alley idea. There's a whole bunch of segments or sub-segments. I pick a head pin. It may not have all the money. It may just be somewhere that I can go that's early and easy to get into, and then I will migrate into other segments based on success. So I could have a theoretical market. What's the potential? What's the available market? And eventually you'll get down to the market demand. So the best cup of coffee you can buy is in Seattle. How many of you are going to go down there and buy one? Nobody. Because there's a geographic aspect to coffee shops. So the total addressable market for coffee shops in North America only means something if you're a chain. It doesn't mean anything if you're a consumer. You go and buy local. All right? So don't always believe in these numbers and the sort of the cascading piece, because there are a lot of limitations in what you can actually do in the marketplace and the way things work and stuff. So when you're looking at a bottom-up model, it's like, what's the amount of money people have? What's the budget? What's their market reach? And how many of them are really going to pay attention to you? In other words, they're attached. And how many can I convert into a potential customer? And then what's my win rate? So if I look at people who sell cars, this is some of the qualification that a good salesperson in a car dealership will go through. Does this person here just because they're bored on a Saturday afternoon? Or do they actually have the money to buy? Do they need to have a car like this? And they'll go through all the different sort of steps and say what's really going to happen and how does it work? So one of the key things here is your head pin segment. All right. The concept from Steve Blank and actually from Jeffrey Moore in a really good book called Crossing the Chasm is that you go to one niche segment, you go and establish yourself and you dominate. You don't have to dominate, you just have to establish yourself. You have to become a player in that market segment and you're going to do quite well. So again, it's the head pin segment on the bowling alley. You want some form of leadership and you want some form of success. So a way of looking at this in an image is that here's the marketplace, here's you. You really want to establish yourself in one place to get in. And in this case, the intersection with the market is quite good. That's totally different than having a customer here, a customer there. And really, they're in 4 different segments. And the difficult part of it is that it's very difficult for you to understand whether it's just somebody who likes your product and they bought it, or whether it is really evidence of a replicable business model and a market segment that really does want your product. Having onesies and twosies is great. You can be opportunistic, but what you prefer is instead of 4 markets with 2 customers, if you have 8 that's in one distinct segment, then you go, wow, I know what to do next to try to grow beyond 8. And that's one of the key things you'd like to do. All right, simple question. A few years ago, we decided that we're the biggest and hopefully the best sailing school in Canada. And we thought we can sell fancy jackets. I don't often win, clothing awards, but at the same time, some of the people who work for me are pretty good at the fancy dresser stuff. And we thought we could sell Helly Hansen because people who come for sailing lessons like to buy a jacket. How many do you think we sold in the first year? Everybody think for a bit. And we'll start at the bottom. How many think we sold more than 100? People have heard me talk before. Okay, a good one vote. You're going to get an A. All right. How about 3? How many people thought we were going to sell a reasonable number? There's a couple of people who are there. Good. That's good to know. How about number 2? All right. Yeah. So it's your first year. You're in the marketplace. You don't necessarily have a bit of a reputation. How many people would say under 10 or 0 to 10? There's more hands going up. Maybe you've heard me speak before. Okay, so the answer is 2. We sold 2 jackets the first year. I still have one of them if anybody'd like a discount. And the first person to buy was a lady from Denmark who lived like 10 kilometers from the factory. And it turned out that tax was so high in Denmark, it was cheaper for her to buy it because I had said shipping was included in Canada and have it sent over to her. So there's all sorts of things. And what this proves is people don't buy fancy or nice sailing clothing necessarily at a community center which offers sailing lessons. All right? Just like McDonald's in the past has had McRibs and pizza and a bunch of other stuff. McRibs lasted in Europe 1 weekend. Everybody was like, I'm not eating that. Okay, so there's a lot of different types of behavior that are important. So the real bottom line is you need to understand the market and say, you go through a whole series of steps. What's my product? What are the features? And where you want to be is what does the customer value? What provides benefit and value to the potential customer? I could have a lot of features, but what I really want is differentiation. What makes us different? So therefore, some people will buy from us and not from all of the others. So you could be reactive with R&D. If you know what your headpin segment is, you're less reactive, all right? And your results go from being unpredictable to being more reliable. You have a reliable customer base. It works really well that way, and everybody slowly but surely understands what you're doing. So any questions so far? We've talked a bit about segmentation and understanding the market, but next we want to really move into, how does buyers behave and what do they do and what are some of the steps they take?
I've got a few online, but
sure.
If anyone wants one in the room, you can put your hand up. Or again, if you're in the room and you want to use slido.com, #NVBC. So either is fine. Okay, any methods or ways to identify the head pin market segment?
I think a lot of that is really understanding the buyer behavior inside the segment. We'll talk a bit more about that later. What's their buying behavior? What's their budget? How do they normally buy? Like, how many of you like buying pharmaceuticals and we'll call them prescription drugs online from people you don't know? Nobody. Okay, so the buyer behavior is that doesn't happen super often. So it's a combination of what's the normal buyer behavior? Is this persona really the person who's going to do things or what's not? So think of the sailing school. Who's the buyer at the sailing school for kids' sailing lessons? Yeah, you guys are overestimating your influence. It's the mother. Okay, it's the mom. So the real answer is the father is an influencer, but the decision maker is the mom. The kids are not consulted until they magically becomes teenagers, and all of a sudden there's a lot of consultation. Okay, but before that, kids seldom get a vote in what they do every day. So there's a variety of different ways of looking at it. But what I'm coming around to is, if you look at the behavior of buyers on the internet. Oh yeah, keep going.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I will verify that comment though about the decision maker. That's my demographic. That's my family. Okay, there's a question around metrics, but you talk about metrics later, right?
Yeah, we talk about metrics at the end, but the real answer is try to measure everything you do. And that's a really important thing.
Okay, yeah, this one's about measuring success for B2C apps, but let's save that till the end. Can you find a blue ocean strategy inside an existing product by focusing on a niche?
On a niche. One of the issues of the idea of a blue ocean product, I'm going to focus on a niche. It can be a blue ocean, but it's very, very short term. So if you start to succeed, everybody else is going to go, oh, I can make that too. All right, so one of the things, an example to me is if you go to Shopify, and there are all these really neat plugins you can get for your website that do all sorts of different things. When somebody builds one of those, once they get to about $1 million in revenue, a lot of the bigger companies notice, and all of a sudden, there's a bunch of products that do that. So it goes from a niche market where you're alone to competition relatively quickly. And that's something that is an important thing to look at.
Okay, one more. Okay, in the event you're building a platform and there are two segments that respond equally well, are there other criteria to consider which one to focus on?
Yeah, so I think if you have two segments, that's great. I'd look at the number of customers, and I'd also then look at which is going to be more profitable or which may be more, call it relatively easier to market to. So if one of the segments that's missing out on, something is on a different continent, that's an awful lot harder to market to than something which is in North America. And if there's totally different requirements, or there's a high margin in one and low margin in another, it's difficult to, you can easily see what the different choice is and how you can make a choice on the difference. Okay, thank you. So this percentage goes up. Everybody uses search to start. So how many of you have an outdated website that hasn't changed in a while? Good. No, a few of you put your hand up. Change it right away. Okay, so your website and being current and stuff, that's how the majority of people will find you when they're looking on the internet. And if they can't find you, it's very difficult. So word of mouth may be a big part of some of your businesses, but the reality is that it's always substantiated by your website, your company's LinkedIn profile, and all the other pieces that are part of it. So have a look at this one for a second. And it's, what's the role of search in a buyer's process? And this is definitely B2B, all right? So how many of you have got a B2B product and every once in a while somebody calls you up and is looking for information? And that will happen. And usually it's an engineer, right?
No, real estate.
Real estate? Okay. So it's a real estate agent perhaps. Yeah. So what you get is that a lot of the time, let's say you have a really interesting software product for managing networks or cybersecurity or something like that. You may get contacted by somebody who said, I'm interested in stuff. And what they're doing right now is they're looking at goodness of fit. And a lot of the time that's a technical buyer. It's an engineer who's looking for stuff. If it's in the area of building bridges, they're looking for things that work out that way. They're not the decision maker, okay? Then you watch how it triages through and it goes through, what are we considering? And then you get into the decision phase and all of a sudden you're confronted with that nobody ever got fired for buying Microsoft Office, all right? So, it's like, this is great and stuff, but you look risky and I'm not buying this, okay? And actually this is government in Canada, okay? Unless you can provide a payroll system really cheap. Okay, so this is something that's an important way of looking at stuff is that every once in a while brand name really works out and really makes a difference. And it's another reason why being really well established in one segment can help you because then you're able to say I have referenceable customers rather than I'm a little bit everywhere. Another way of looking at it is if you're looking at B2B, how many people are involved in the buying process? All right, so the higher the number, does that mean more time or less time? More time. If you're selling to government, is the number higher or lower? Higher, okay, way more people. In government, it's all about mitigating risk, okay? I don't want to look bad, so I'll make sure 12 other people agree with me. All right, so there's a whole, I'm oversimplifying it, but I think that there's a whole series of things. So this is why quite often you'll have a buying process for something which is an elaborate product which is measured in months or maybe in more than a year because it has to be budgeted for in the next fiscal year. So who are the participants in the buying process? There's the user. So in the real estate example, it's the real estate agent who's interested. There's influencers. Quite often an influencer could be a consultant or someone who is in charge of helping a company make a decision to go into a new marketplace. There's the buyer, then there's who decides, and there are gatekeepers to get there. Anybody here in the past ever been on, you're on a conference call and there's a whole bunch of people on the conference call from the potential buyer, and hopefully there's more than two of you, so as you get the names at the beginning of the call, you look up every single one of them on LinkedIn. So you try to figure out who's who on the other side of the call. And what happens when, after about 20 minutes, half an hour, you've done a demo and stuff, one person starts to speak and everybody else goes real quiet? Who's that? That's the decision maker. Okay, when everybody else goes quiet and one person asks a couple of questions, it's very clear that's the decision maker. And if you understand that an advancer can figure it out on the fly, it really helps you. So the real thing to remember, and this list sort of underestimates the finance part of it, because quite often somebody in finance can put their hand up and say, we don't have the money, okay? So you look at all the projects that are going on inside a large corporation or a crown corporation in BC, because we have a lot of them. There's usually something that happens where at one point they know they need 7 things, but they get the money for 3. So a really good project gets put on hold until next year. Alrighty, third-party validation. This is really important. That's why you have testimonials on your website. That's why you hope that the posts you're reading on Facebook are from real people and not from, mimes or something like that. Okay, you take a look at this, and third-party validation is really important in terms of us wanting to be part of a product or being interested in a product. And then let's do a little quick poll again. Say, when you book a hotel room, do you read the comments from past customers that rate the hotel? How many people say yes? How many people say no? So there's the odd person who just, oh, this looks good, I'm there. But the majority of us go and read the comments because it's third-party validation, all right? And if you get 100 comments that are only glowing, you become suspicious because they might have edited out the negative ones. Whereas if you have a negative comment and then there's mitigation, oh, sorry, sir, we've done X, Y, Z, that's actually even more powerful, all right? So it's the idea of, you look at what independent people, third-party validation says, because we don't believe the marketing that most stuff comes out. Otherwise, every hotel looks great. They never show you the cracks in the wall or the ants running around in the courtyard, stuff like that. If you book a hotel room, do you insist that it has everything you want, even if it costs more? How many people are into everything? Okay, it looks like everybody here is cheap. Okay, find the most important things and then the value, okay? It's really a function of what do I really need, and then what's adequate. So you can extrapolate that into buyer behavior, especially with first version of your product. If you can figure out what are the core things they really need, it makes it an awful lot better to sell them not what they ask for, but what they will accept. And then you promise them additional items in version 2 or version 3 or whatever else it is. So do you need to build every feature potential customers ask for? Yes or no? No, you do not. Why are we not? And is differentiation based only on your product? The answer is no. You may have better customer service. You may do a whole bunch of things. Angie, can you come up? We're going to do the video. Okay, we are going to play one video today. And it's one of our favorite people.
Well, we forgot to test the audio, so fingers crossed.
This is a tech audience, so you may empathize with him.
I hope there's audio, Al, because I can't turn it on.
That's,
Do you have audio on the background?
I'm not receiving anything else.
Sorry, what? Could,
They have it in their DI box, right? They have a little box in the podium there. There might be a dial on it that you can crank up.
Yes? Oh, yeah, there it is. Hold on.
And up.
okay, now try. You're on mute.
Oh, you're muted there. Your Mac is muted.
Yeah, the Mac is muted, but I can't unmute it.
You're unmuted there.
There, okay.
Give it one more try. And then you're on your own later today.
There should be a volume choices. Yeah, under settings, where's your settings? Audio. There's a sound, yeah.
Some of you guys have done this before.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was off.
we'll give them 30 seconds. Don't feel pressure.
It is really good video, so. Give us 2 cents. Okay. We tested the video would play. We thought we were like on the ball.
I don't know there's a system, but can you try that again?
Yeah, it's playing.
Okay, why don't we,
We'll have to cut it. Apologies.
so anyways, the link is in the PowerPoint deck. You want to unplug this and hold the microphone? This could be second best, which is better than nothing.
I don't know how the web stream will fare, but you can visit the link. Hold on. Good. It's not working.
Still not playing. Oh, it's muted.
Oh, yeah, but it won't let me.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah?
You want
Yeah.
the handheld to just the laptop speaker?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, someone suggested that,
we're failing still.
but it
so.
still isn't working.
Anyways, let's do this later.
Okay, we'll play it during lunch once we figure it out.
Okay,
Okay.
you can come up for personal viewings.
When you got to plug your audio cable first.
We did.
You have to put new speakers.
We did unplug the audio cable and it still won't work. I don't know something's changed the settings. Ooh.
I heard. It usually works. That's all I can say. Okay, we'll keep going. Look it up. It is funny. Okay, hold on. Let's advance you a little bit here. Okay, you want to go this way?
Yeah. All right. So one of the things we said before is that the way you compete in the marketplace when you go in is a product of many things. It isn't just the product. So if you look at this, the first 5 or 6 items that are at the top are not about the product. They're about what existing customers do you have, which is the same as a testimonial. What are the key partners? Some of the financial health of the company, all sorts of things that are like that. And each one of those actually tells you whether or not the company is strong in the marketplace, and quite often doing well in the number of items at the top is a way of being able to sell to larger customers. So there's a well-known company in Vancouver about 10 or 12 years ago called VivoNet. It was one of the first very interesting point of sale products, which was a SaaS-based model, cloud, and this is going back 15 years ago, did really, really well. They started to make inroads into universities, like the cash register and all the other stuff. And then a very large company called Sodexo came to them and said, we're quite interested in your product and stuff, and did a trial, et cetera, and then came back to them and said, you're really small for what we want to normally work with. And at that time, they had 60 to 80 employees. It's a fair-sized company. They said, if you had more money in the bank, we'd be happy to have you. And they control the university market in Canada. Sodexo is a mega company. And so VivoNet went out and raised $8 million to put in the bank. And they were big enough to do that. And it was just to assure the customer that they were financially strong enough to be around for the next 5 years. Because Sodexo doesn't make 6-month bets, they make decade-long bets. And it's a way of looking at the different things that are there. So things that you can acquire or things you can work on as a small company are things like partners, all right? If you are partnered even with AWS, you know, that's a positive statement. It means that you're farther along, different things that are like that. So I'm gonna go into a couple of more specific items. I'm gonna do something called whole product. And how many of you build software that's going to be used in something else, or you build hardware, but it fits into a larger, we'll call larger product and a larger unit? So the whole product definition is what's the physical product, or it could be software, all the associated factors like services, partners, warranties, guarantees. This equals your whole product. And that's what provides the value to the customer. You know, much as we may or may not be super excited by our cell phone company provider, you know, if you go to TELUS, Rogers, or Bell, they have pretty reasonable whole product. And it makes it difficult for somebody else to compete because they do lots of things that are really quite well done. So here's an example, the whole product, okay? All the complementary services. And it can be everything from consulting in advance, you buy hardware, there's software, there's peripherals, post-sales and service and support. I was with one company 20 years ago that just had this magical engineering product that helped aerospace. And one of the target customers they had was Rolls-Royce, and which is at that time, still is, in Scotland. Big, huge fabricating plant where they did a lot of work on aerospace engines for large airplanes. And they bought a system for their R&D lab, and 3 years later, they still hadn't bought any for production. And we're like, what is going on? Why not? The results out of R&D were fantastic. So finally, a couple of our engineers went over, and I told one of them, I said, here, you have an unlimited alcohol budget. Take these guys to the pub and try to figure out why they haven't purchased. What's missing? And I get this phone call, collect phone call from, it's 1 o'clock in the morning in Scotland, and this guy's sort of semi-coherent because he's been in the pub for 5 hours, but he goes, you have to have a service person within 12 kilometers of the factory. As soon as you hire someone and put them that distance, inside that radius, they'll buy from you. And I go, well, nobody told us that. There's unwritten rules every once in a while, and that's how it works. So we hired somebody, and they ordered another system, so it worked out well. All right, whole product, combination of different things. So for vacation travelers, business travelers, and what's the thing? And what's interesting is you got this whole bundle of things, but quite often there's one thing which is number one. What's the one thing that really, really makes a difference? So my sons played, you know, high-end basketball, hockey and stuff. They go in tournaments down in Seattle. Which sort of hotel do you think a hockey team stays in? Is it vacation travelers or business? It's vacation. For a hockey team, what's the number one thing that's really important to them? The buffet breakfast, okay. All right, remember one time we went and the team captain said, if we have an early morning game, can we go for breakfast, play, and go for breakfast again? Okay, so there's, you know, the number one item is quite important. Another example, what's the equivalent of Dunkin' Donuts in Canada? It's Tim Hortons. So years ago, Dunkin' Donuts decided we got to compete with the Starbucks company. Let's figure out how it works and what are we going to do. And so they sat down and they decided that what they would do would be they would take 100 people who go to Starbucks all the time, give them a card to go to Dunkin' Donuts for free and vice versa. So there would be 200 people in there really study and they'd see how it works and stuff. And then they went for a month and they did a whole series of exit interviews and stuff. But here's the question. What percentage of people switched? at the other coffee shop after a month? What do people think? Let's start at the top and say 0 to 5%. Number of hands, say 5 to 10. Okay. 10 to 25. We're getting fewer hands. 25 to 50. Almost, yeah, just the odd person, and then over 50%. So the answer is 0. Turns out they're totally different tribes. And that's the way to describe it. They have different buying behavior, and they're very different. And it's like the quotes are great. The people from Starbucks, I go there and they get all this stuff with sugar on it to eat. And then, you know, and it's all Formica tables and guys wearing cat hats and all this sort of stuff. So it's very different than what they're used to. And I mean, when you think about Starbucks, one of their statements today is that they want it to be the third place that you're really comfortable to spend time in, your home, your office, and Starbucks. And then the quotes from the people who are from Dunkin' Donuts were great. It was like, you go there and you can't even buy a small, medium, and large. And you know, they have all these fancy names, all of the different pastries, they come from Europe, which is nice. And one guy said, it's like spending Christmas with people you don't know. So they had all these different ways of looking at it, and it turns out they really are different tribes, and that so they don't try to compete, they try to just be better at dealing with the tribe that shows up at their store. So one of the simplest ones, or one of the most important ones, is positioning, okay? You know, and you can look at positioning, and the real thing is trying to answer is, why will they buy from us versus our competition? How many of you like to go to Starbucks? How many go to the family coffee shop down the road? Starbucks? Family coffee shop. Yeah, so there's a little bit of affinity for local. And you know, the value proposition is relatively complex to get from one to the other, but the idea behind positioning is that you're managing the product and its presentation to fit a predetermined place in the mind of the customer. I asked at the beginning, how many of you have iPhones? How many are Android? And it really, you know, that's a very complex differentiation there, but one of the things you can do is you can make it into an equation is what's my market segmentation and then what's my competitive differentiation. So if I pick segments that really like what I provide and I'm differentiated so I'm different, then it increases your chances of having positioned yourself effectively. So there's more definitions. So, you know, what's the perceived status within the market? How does it work in people's heads? What do they think of different things? How do you build relationships to secure and communicate competitive advantage? The idea behind marketing is that you do a whole variety of different things to make sure people understand what you stand for, what your message is, and why they could eventually buy from you. And there's a whole series of things which is interesting. Sometimes you wish there was more truth in marketing, but we'll talk about that on another day. Here's a question. My wife drives a very safe car. What type of car does she drive?
Volvo.
Yeah, it's a Volvo. Okay. My wife is also Swedish. And I think the question should be, which car has very expensive spare parts? Okay. And when was the last time Volvo won a safety award? It's been more than a decade. But the positioning in our minds is that it's a very safe car. It is a very safe car because it's heavy. All right. So there's a variety of things that go into it, but this is very hard to change. People's perception of things is difficult. So you need to go and understand, how do I position myself, and then how do I reinforce what I do? So if you look at large multinational corporations that are successful, they seldom change sort of their positioning and their market messages. All right, they evolve over time, they don't pivot. That's something that large companies have a difficulty doing. So how does this impact things? All right, so one of the biggest things is the market leader usually is able to charge a higher price, okay? Just because they can. The iPhone is a very good example. There's a variety of things. What goes into the whole product is the sales cycle normal. So once again, especially if you look in government, they're always used to repurchasing the things that they purchased in the past. But let's go through a little bit of an exercise. We've got a few more minutes left and say, you know, this is straight out of Jeffrey Moore, but what does the customer need? And you can describe your product in 6 different steps. So you go through these questions and all the different things. You can answer these questions, but you have to answer them very succinctly in 1 sentence. You can't meander on and list features. That's not positioning. Another way of doing it is, what's the positioning criteria? And you say, this is what I need to know on the left side, and then I make the statements on the right. I'll make one caveat for this, is that if you go, for target customers, and you go, people have real trouble deciding, where to go on vacation. If you say that, I don't really know what you're going to do. So sometimes it's really good to state what your company's product is and what market segment you're in before you launch into the other 6 things. Okay, it just makes it easier. So let's look at a couple of examples. How many of you bought an iPod at the very beginning? All right, you guys must have a lot of money. Okay, so the iPod at the beginning was a very expensive device. Okay, so just read through this. Tell me, is it still correct today? Or was it, would you perceive that it's correct? Yeah, so this is, what's interesting is Apple produced this statement 2 years before they ever introduced the product. They knew what they were going to sell to who and why. It came into the marketplace at $600. And what's intriguing is my daughter wanted one, and I had to wait until it was down closer to 100 because I wasn't going to buy a music player for a 10-year-old. It was that expensive. But their original target market was the same as the BlackBerry. And because it was expensive, they weren't making 10 million of them. They were making a smaller run. And it was a new product. If you look at the theory of how they were going to move things, it was the iPod, then it was going to be the iPad, and then it was going to be the iPhone. And iPhone was going to be number 3, and one of the engineers came to Steve Jobs one day and said, I think I have this concept for making the screen on an iPhone bigger. Can I work on this? And he came back a month later and he had the basis of inertial scrolling, where you could scroll. And Steve Jobs looked at it and said, we're going to do the iPhone before we do the iPad, because this makes the screen effectively bigger and it improves the user experience immeasurably. So that's how it worked. So when you look at this, there's a whole series of things. They compare themselves to a substitute. In this case, they're naming companies. So if you say, our product's way better than Microsoft, IBM, Cisco, may not be believable. Okay, so you sort of decide what you're going to compare yourself to. Another example, this one's from a long time ago. And what's interesting is Starbucks has come back to this a couple of times when things weren't going well in the marketplace. To go back to the very original value proposition. One of the key things here is that I don't even talk about the coffee, right? They're talking about the experience and the environment. And they compare themselves to drip coffee, which is, they're not really saying, we're different than blends, we're different than Tim Hortons or whatever they're doing. And all the different things that are there. So it's understanding who they want to cater to and who they are not going to cater to. They're still allowed, somebody's still allowed to go to Starbucks if they're not a Starbucks fan, but it's who's our core audience. Finally, you can have just a tagline. And in FedEx's case, it's on the door. And this time it says, the world on time. And this is not their first tagline. What was the very first FedEx tagline? It was when it absolutely positively has to get there. It was their very first tagline. And now they are worldwide with a full suite of office services from printing to you name it. So their tagline reflects what they are today. Things evolve. So for your positioning, one of the things I ask you to do, if you have a positioning statement for your product and you can substitute a competitor's name right into that statement, then it means you're not differentiated enough. One of the things I'll do sometimes is when I read the submissions for New Ventures BC, the differentiation slide, or the part that's in the business model canvas, I put it into Google, and if it goes to IBM's website, you have a problem. All right, so it just is like that. So I'm going to go into pricing and value. What is the most common pricing objections that you hear? Is your price too high or too low? How many people hear that their price is too low? Consumers are lying. Okay, they won't tell you the truth. All right, so one of the things is quite often people are prepared to pay more money. So if I say, do you want to pay $5 or $10? The answer is predictable, right? I can't even answer that question. Lesley said something earlier on, which is what are the other products you buy? So if they also buy cell phone connectivity, which you know in Canada is far more expensive than it should be, but it's $50 or $60 a month, whatever that magic number is, you know that they're prepared to buy products in that price range. It gives you a comparable. So there's a variety of things you can do. Most people underprice their product, okay? That's just a statement of fact. And we'll get into the whys a little bit later. Do you offer promotional pricing? I will give you 6 months for the price of 3. If you purchase now, it's a 15-month contract. You get a discount, but they have to purchase. Promotional pricing is different than having a low price at the outset. Licensing alternatives, are there discounts to a reseller, the different things that work. So pricing is a combination of different things. You can have cost plus. I have to be able to build, or I have to be able to sell my product for more than it costs me to build it. So if you're a SaaS software product, this cannot come true with your first 10 customers. You have to extrapolate out and say, what's it going to be like a couple of years from now? And then price your product for when you're in the market with customers. And if you go into the market at the beginning with too low a price, it doesn't work. So if your product is better than everybody else's, you take a look at what is the market like, and you probably need to be near the middle. And if you're going to be a premium product, slightly above the middle. Okay, this is a nice theory, but you have to decide if it's going to work or not. And then finally, the value of the product to the buyer. It's a combination of things, all right? But at the same time, you have to remember I've been in a couple of government offices, and in one case, it's the CFO of a large, it's a service provider, and it has a calendar on the wall, and there's a big circle around March 31st, the end of June 30th, and other stuff. And he said, this is when all the guys who try to sell to me have to make quota. I phone them at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the last day of the quarter, asking if I can have a discount. You're like, oh. Okay, so it's quite different the way it'll work if you're selling B2B.
David, 6 minutes.
Sorry?
6 minutes.
6 minutes? Okay, we'll get there. Do you have to have the lowest price to compete when you enter the market? No. Okay, you don't need to do that. Just a few more things on analytics. There are a series of really common analytical tools that you can use. If you are running your website and you do a bit of marketing, what happens to your website traffic? All these things are really helpful, stuff like that. And quite often they're sent to you for free. There's a really neat book by a company called HubSpot, which is internet marketing. You can get it for free. There are tons of great tools out there. HubSpot is really good at giving them away. Be careful, once you get to a reasonable size, you're going to pay a lot of money. But the idea is that they hook you on all the different tools that you can use and some of the different pieces that are there. So this one is an ebook, sold over, now the number's over 250,000, but the idea is that it helps you with your website. And more than anything, the key thing that people have is content. How do I reuse the content? I can post it on LinkedIn, I can post it on Instagram, I have it on my website. Quality messaging can be used and reused a fair bit. So that's something that's important. How often do you check your Google Analytics? Every day? Steven's a plant. Okay. Anybody else? How many of you do it weekly? Monthly? How many of you have never looked at your Google Analytics? You don't have to admit it. But it's actually important to go and check and see. If I do some marketing, I go to a show, I talk to people, did it have any impact? All right? It gives you an idea of what's going to work. Just make a comment on social media. There's a whole series of things. 93% of B2B and I think 100% of B2C are involved in using social media. The thing to remember is that it is supposed to be a conversation. It's not a broadcast channel. So you have to really allow people to participate and reshare, to like, all the different things that they do. And it's something that's there. Make a final product or two. Anybody here sell a product that sells itself? Not really. There's the odd one every once in a while, but most of the time, you've got to make an effort to sell it, okay? And a lot of you will have a limited marketing budget or a limited amount of time to do marketing yourself. The question is, how do you spend your marketing budget, either in money or in time? What are the things that you do? So one final thing, we're just going to do a quick poll. For each segment, identify which methods you will use. So if you're going to sell into a segment that requires a whole bunch of display advertising and stuff, and you don't have the money, maybe you need to pick a different segment. Which methods will I sell into a segment, or use to sell into a segment? If you're going to do 12 things, you got too many. And then for priority segments, create a budget. And here we go. How many segments will you target initially? Who's got 1? 2? 3? More than 3? Be careful, okay? More than 3, you're fired. Okay, it's very, very hard to sell to everybody when you're a small company. It's very different. That's not to say that somebody can come to your website or come and contact your company and you can be opportunistic. All right, that's absolutely fine, but the biggest thing is don't do custom work, or if you are going to do custom work, make sure they pay for it. All right, so if they're not part of your target segment, you can take their money, but make sure that it's not really way better for them than it is for you. Some neat reading material. These are good books. I really like the one on the right-hand side, which is the Startup Owner's Manual. If any of you have insomnia, it's a great cure. Okay, so these are good books, but they're really, some of them quite often are really good. The Startup Owner's Manual, all the best stuff is in the last 2 pages in every chapter, so you can read just that part if you want. And this is how you can get hold of Lesley and myself. And do we have any questions? Questions?
We've got a couple of minutes. There is one online that I will ask. For the person who asked the chicken and egg question, you know who you are. Lesley nicely typed an answer for you, so just check that on Slido. Okay, there's a question around the whole product approach. Someone's wondering, would that distract from the mission of a startup because it would reduce margins and attention?
I think it's possible it could distract, but if the consumer wants, let's say you have a really good software product, if you aren't able to, let's say, you know, if you're not available on an iPhone or something like that, you have a whole product problem. Okay, so what is the minimum variety of things you can do? The biggest thing you want to do is, as a startup, they can focus on what they want and then partner to get the other pieces. So, and a lot of the, you know, look at what Apple does. They want you to go and partner with them. They take 30%, but it works.
And then I guess back to the metrics question. What metrics do you use to measure success? They're asking specifically for B2C apps.
That would be interesting to know what the app is like. So let's say it's in healthcare, which is controlled by the government. You could have all sorts of traffic, but if the government isn't paying you, then it's really difficult to survive. So usually you would probably go and say, what's my web traffic? How often do people come back to my website? Maybe more than once, or use my app more than once. So there could be a download of an app. It could be a use of the app. It could be consistent users. How many are coming monthly, weekly, or even daily? And all those things then give you an idea of your traffic and your usage, and you can translate that into customers and revenue over time.
Okay, we'll do one live here, and then we'll take a break.
Can you hear me? Yeah. My question is related to what Lesley mentioned about the tile company. It's about strategy. So you mentioned they went and actually sold the product as a market research, and I quite don't understand, like, say, how could they do that? How would they eventually deliver this product to the customers?
So they used a similar model to like the Kickstarter one, putting up a thing and said like we've got a demo or a beta of this product. And so they did the marketing of going to wherever it was online and said, okay, here's your opportunity to one-off purchase this product. So basically it was kind of like a Kickstarter model, but they didn't put it on Kickstarter because they wanted to see if they could organically generate and attract this market to them. So it was that kind of thing of they didn't promise that we'll have a recurring thing or whatever. It was you can sign up for a one-time opportunity to buy this. We'll make as many of these things as there are, or if they didn't get enough money, then they could have just said, we're not taking your money. It was more of a, would you be interested in buying this kind of setup? So that's how they structured that, to actually do a real market test of, can we find our market segments? Do they exist? Are there enough of them to run that first batch?
Okay, great. Well, while you're both standing, I'll say thank you, Lesley. Thank you, Dave, for the great session.
Okay,
Give them a round of applause.
great.